The silver leaf was never supposed to fall. The whisper spread through the crowd before anyone realized they had spoken it aloud. Thousands of eyes turned toward the sacred tree at the center of Elder Grove, its enormous silver-white branches stretching more than 100 feet into the evening sky. For 3 centuries, the ancient tree had stood silent. No glowing blossoms, no falling leaves, no signs from the moon goddess. The elders often said its magic had gone dormant long ago. Yet on this night, beneath the pale glow of a rising moon, something impossible happened. Eloan Hartwell never saw the first leaf detach from the branch above her. She was too busy staring at the ground, trying not to hear the laughter around her. The gravel beneath her worn boots blurred through the sting of unshed tears. Just minutes earlier, she had stood before the entire pack during the moon bond ceremony. Just minutes earlier, she had hoped that maybe, somehow, this year would be different. It wasn't. Rejected. The word still echoed inside her chest. It followed her through every cruel glance and every whispered remark. Some wolves shook their heads as she passed. Others smirked openly. To them, Eloan was the Omega who never belonged. Too quiet. Too ordinary. Too easy to overlook. She kept walking, her thin gray cloak pulled tightly around her shoulders against the cool autumn breeze. The sooner she left the ceremony grounds, the better. Then the air changed. A strange hush rolled across the gathering like a wave. One by one, conversations died. Music stopped. Even the distant rustling of the forest seemed to disappear. Eloan frowned and looked up. A single silver leaf drifted slowly through the air. It spun once, twice, then landed gently against her shoulder. The world stopped. Her breath caught. Around her, hundreds of wolves stared in stunned silence. The leaf should have crumbled the moment it touched the ground. Every child in Eldergrove knew that. Sacred leaves never remained whole. Yet this one rested against her cloak, glowing softly like captured moonlight. Eloan's hands trembled. No, someone whispered. That can't be right. An elder stepped forward. His face had gone completely pale. Another leaf fell. Then another. Then another. Silver light began spreading through the branches overhead. Gasps rippled through the crowd. The sacred tree was awakening. Eloan instinctively stepped backward. The leaves followed. One landed in her hair. Another touched her wrist. The glow intensified. Her heart pounded so hard she could hear it in her ears. Move away from the tree, a voice barked. But she couldn't. The roots beneath the ancient trunk suddenly shimmered with soft silver light. Tiny blossoms emerged along the bark, blooming before everyone's eyes. For the first time in centuries, the sacred tree responded to someone. And it was responding to her. Eloan, the rejected Omega. Fear mixed with confusion inside her chest. She looked around desperately, hoping someone would explain what was happening. No one did. Most simply stared. Others looked afraid. A few looked angry. The Alpha of Eldergrove pushed through the crowd, his expression dark and unreadable. Step away from the tree, he ordered again. Eloan swallowed hard and obeyed. The moment she moved, the glowing branches stretched slightly toward her as though reaching. A collective gasp swept through the gathering. Several elders exchanged alarmed glances. One elderly woman near the front dropped her walking cane entirely. Tears filled her eyes as she stared at Eloan. The signs, she whispered. After all these years, but before she could finish, the silver glow surged brighter than before. Every blossom opened at once. Moonlight poured through the branches. And high above them, hidden among the glowing leaves, a symbol appeared in the trunk of the sacred tree. A symbol no living wolf had seen before. Eloan didn't understand its meaning. Yet as she stared at it, an unfamiliar feeling settled deep within her heart. Not fear, not shame, something older, something waiting. Somewhere far beyond Eldergrove, beyond mountains and rivers and kingdoms she had never seen, a distant wind began to howl through the night. The symbol remained etched within the glowing trunk long after the silver blossoms stopped opening. No one moved. No one spoke. The entire clearing seemed suspended between one heartbeat and the next. Eloan stood frozen near the edge of the gathering grounds, her fingers curled tightly around her cloak. She could feel hundreds of eyes fixed on her. Moments ago, she had been invisible. Now every glance carried weight. Curiosity, fear, suspicion. The shift was so sudden it made her stomach twist. The Alpha of Eldergrove finally stepped forward. His dark ceremonial cloak swept across the stone path as he approached the sacred tree. His expression remained controlled, but tension hardened his jaw. He studied the glowing symbol carefully before turning toward the elders. "Has anyone seen this mark before?" Silence answered him. Several elders exchanged uneasy looks. Most were old enough to remember stories told by grandparents and great-grandparents, yet none seemed willing to speak. Then the elderly woman who had dropped her cane slowly stepped closer to the tree. Her silver hair shimmered beneath the moonlight. "I have seen drawings," she said quietly. "Only drawings." The crowd stirred. "Where?" someone asked. "In the forbidden records beneath the Hall of Ancestors." A murmur swept through the wolves gathered in the clearing. Forbidden records were not discussed openly. Some doubted they even existed. The Alpha frowned. "And what do those records say?" The old woman hesitated. Eloan noticed the uncertainty in her eyes. Not uncertainty from age. Uncertainty from fear. "They speak of a choosing," she finally whispered. "A sign carried by the sacred tree when the kingdoms fall out of balance." The crowd immediately erupted into nervous conversation. Eloan felt her pulse quicken. Choosing? Balance? None of it made sense. She had spent her entire life being overlooked. Nothing about her felt important enough for ancient prophecies. "Enough." The Alpha's voice cut through the noise. The clearing fell silent once more. He looked directly at Eloan. For the first time, she wished he would not. "Come forward." Her feet refused to move at first. Every instinct told her to disappear. Yet after a long moment, she stepped toward the sacred tree. The glowing leaves scattered around her boots. The closer she came, the brighter the roots seemed to shine. Another wave of whispers rolled through the crowd. Eloan swallowed hard. "Touch the tree," the Alpha instructed. Her eyes widened. "What? Touch it." She stared at the ancient trunk. Moonlight danced across the silver bark. The symbol remained visible, glowing faintly beneath its surface. Everything about the tree felt alive now. Watching. Waiting. Slowly, she extended her hand. The instant her fingertips brushed the bark, warmth spread through her palm. It was not painful. It felt strangely familiar, like returning home after years away. A soft silver pulse traveled through the roots beneath the ground. Gasps erupted across the clearing. Tiny lights appeared among the branches overhead, floating between the blossoms like drifting stars. Eloan immediately pulled her hand away. The lights remained. More appeared, then more. The entire canopy sparkled with thousands of glowing points. No one had ever witnessed anything like it. The old woman took a slow step backward. "The records were true," she breathed. Fear tightened inside Eloan's chest. Nothing about this felt normal anymore. She looked toward the crowd, hoping to find reassurance somewhere among the familiar faces she had known her entire life. Instead, she found something else. Distance. The wolves who once ignored her now stared as if she were a stranger. Even worse, some looked at her as though she had done something wrong. The realization hurt more than she expected. Then a cold wind swept through the clearing. Every glowing light among the branches flickered at once. The symbol in the trunk brightened. And deep beneath the roots of the sacred tree, something ancient seemed to awaken. The ancient feeling beneath the roots vanished as suddenly as it had appeared, leaving only silence behind. Yet the silence felt different now. Heavier. Watchful. Eloan stood motionless beneath the glowing branches, her pulse still racing as the last silver lights drifted between the blossoms overhead. Every instinct told her to leave, to run home, to pretend none of this had happened. But the faces surrounding her made that impossible. The wolves of Elder Grove no longer looked at her with indifference. They looked at her with suspicion. The change hurt more than she expected. A few hours ago, she had been invisible. Now she felt exposed beneath 1,000 unseen judgments. The Alpha folded his arms across his chest and studied the sacred tree with narrowed eyes. "The gathering is over," he announced. "Everyone return to your homes." No one moved immediately. The crowd lingered, whispering among themselves. Eloan caught fragments as they drifted through the air. "It is unnatural. The tree has never done that. Something is wrong. Why her?" The last question seemed to follow her wherever she looked. Why her? She wished she knew the answer. The elderly woman who had spoken of the forbidden records approached slowly. Her weathered face carried neither fear nor anger, only concern. "Child," she said softly, "come with me." Before Eloan could answer, another voice interrupted. "No," The Alpha stepped between them. The old woman frowned. She needs guidance. What she needs, the Alpha replied, is observation. The word landed like a stone. Observation. Not protection. Not understanding. Observation. Eloan felt her stomach sink. Around them, several pack officials nodded in agreement. One stepped forward and lowered his voice. Until we know what this means, precautions should be taken. Eloan stared at them. Precautions? The official avoided her eyes. The tree has not awakened in centuries. I did not do anything, she said quietly. Maybe not intentionally, another elder replied. The implication stung. Fear began spreading through the crowd faster than reason. Eloan could see it happening. The more uncertain they became, the more they searched for someone to blame. And she was standing directly in front of them. The old woman shook her head. This is foolish. Perhaps, the Alpha said. But caution protects the pack. Eloan felt cold despite the warm glow still lingering around the sacred tree. She looked toward the massive trunk, hoping for some explanation. Some sign. The blossoms remained open, shimmering softly beneath the moonlight. Beautiful. Silent. Unhelpful. A pair of guards approached. Neither appeared hostile, but their presence alone made her chest tighten. You will remain in the Eastern Lodge tonight, the Alpha said. Until further notice. Eloan blinked. You are confining me? Temporarily. The answer offered little comfort. More whispers spread through the gathering. Some wolves looked relieved. Others looked ashamed. A few looked disappointed that something even worse was not happening. Eloan lowered her eyes. She had spent years hoping her pack would finally see her. Tonight they had. And somehow it felt worse than being ignored. The walk to the Eastern Lodge felt longer than usual. The small stone building sat near the edge of the village, overlooking the dark forest beyond. 2 lanterns glowed beside the doorway as the guards escorted her inside. The room was simple. A narrow bed. A wooden table. 1 window facing the trees. Nothing more. The door closed behind her with a quiet click. She was not locked inside, but the message remained clear. Stay here. Eloan sat on the edge of the bed and stared through the window. The forest stretched endlessly beneath the moonlight. Silver mist drifted between distant pines. Somewhere beyond those woods lay places she had only heard about in stories. Kingdoms. Mountains. Roads that crossed the world. None of them mattered tonight. Her entire future seemed trapped inside one unanswered question. Why had the sacred tree chosen her? As if responding to the thought, a faint silver glow appeared far beyond the village, deep within the darkness of the forest. Eloan sat upright. The glow lasted only a second before disappearing completely. She wondered if she had imagined it. Then a distant wind carried through the trees. Soft, whispering, and for the briefest moment, it sounded almost like a voice calling her name. Eloan barely slept. Each time she closed her eyes, she saw the silver symbol glowing beneath the bark of the sacred tree. Each time she drifted toward sleep, she heard the whisper again. Her name carried on the wind. By dawn, pale sunlight filtered through the window of the Eastern Lodge, painting soft patterns across the wooden floor. The village beyond seemed unusually quiet. She rose from the bed and crossed to the window. A thin layer of morning mist clung to the rooftops. Wolves moved through the streets below, but something had changed. Conversations stopped whenever someone looked toward the lodge. People turned away quickly when they noticed her watching. The isolation settled heavily in her chest. A knock sounded at the door. Before she could answer, it opened. The elderly woman from the ceremony stepped inside, carrying a small leather satchel. Her silver hair was braided neatly this morning, and her eyes held the same mixture of concern and wonder Eloan remembered from the night before. You should eat something, the woman said gently. Eloan accepted the basket she offered, but found she had little appetite. Who are you? She asked. The woman smiled faintly. My name is Maeve Rowan. I am the keeper of the ancestral records. Eloan blinked. The forbidden records? Forbidden only because most people fear what they do not understand. Maeve pulled a weathered book from her satchel and placed it carefully on the table. The cover appeared ancient, the leather cracked with age. Symbols faded by time decorated the corners. I spent most of the night searching. Eloan stared at the book. Searching for what? Maeve slowly opened it. Yellowed pages revealed drawings remarkably similar to the glowing symbol that had appeared within the sacred tree. Eloan immediately felt her pulse quicken. That is it, she whispered. The same mark. Maeve nodded. I was hoping I was mistaken. Why? The older woman hesitated before answering. Because if this record is accurate, the awakening of the tree was never meant to be a blessing alone. A chill moved through Aloan despite the warmth of the room. Maeve turned several pages. Illustrations filled the margins. Trees glowing beneath moonlight. Wolves gathered beneath silver branches. Mountains. Rivers. Crowns. Kingdoms. These records are older than Elder Grove itself, Maeve explained quietly. They tell the story of a time when the lands were united under a sacred covenant. A balance existed between the kingdoms. Aloan listened carefully. What happened to it? Greed. Pride. Fear. The same things that always break fragile peace. Maeve's fingers rested upon a final page. The illustration there was different from the others. A lone figure stood beneath a radiant tree, while distant wolves crossed mountains beneath the moon. Most of the writing had faded beyond recognition, but a few lines remained readable. Maeve traced them carefully. When the roots awaken, the chosen shall appear. Through her, the path shall open. Through her, the kingdoms shall remember. Silence filled the room. Aloan stared at the ancient words. The chosen? Maeve looked directly at her. I believe the tree chose you. Aloan immediately shook her head. No, that cannot be true. The tree disagrees. I am nobody. The words escaped before she could stop them. Years of rejection had taught her that lesson well. Maeve's expression softened. Sometimes the world overlooks the very people destiny sees most clearly. Before Aloan could respond, voices suddenly echoed outside the lodge. Raised voices. Concerned voices. She moved toward the window. Several pack officials were gathering in the village square. The Alpha stood among them. His expression appeared grim. A messenger had arrived from somewhere beyond Elder Grove. Even from this distance, Aloan could sense tension spreading through the crowd. Maeve joined her at the window. The old woman's eyes widened slightly. That is not good. What is happening? Aloan asked. Maeve did not answer immediately. Her gaze remained fixed on the messenger carrying a banner marked with a silver wolf crest neither of them had seen before. Then the old woman whispered something that made Aloan's heart skip a beat. News travels faster than prophecy, Maeve said quietly. And somehow, someone beyond these woods already knows the sacred tree has awakened. The silver wolf banner remained visible in the village square long after the messenger dismounted. Aloan watched from the lodge window as more villagers gathered around, drawn by curiosity and unease. The mood in Elder Grove had shifted yet again. What began as confusion now felt larger, as though invisible threads were pulling events together from places far beyond the forest. Maeve remained beside the window, her expression thoughtful. That crest does not belong to any neighboring pack, she said quietly. Then where is it from? Aloan asked. Before the older woman could answer, the messenger handed a sealed scroll to the Alpha. Even from a distance, Aloan noticed the way his posture stiffened as he read the contents. Whatever message had arrived, it was unexpected. A murmur spread through the square. Then the Alpha dismissed the crowd and ordered the messenger escorted to the council hall. The gathering slowly dispersed, but the uneasy energy remained. Aloan stepped away from the window. Someone knows, she whispered. Someone knows about the tree. Maeve nodded. And that concerns me. The old woman closed the ancient record book and carefully returned it to her satchel. There are stories hidden in these pages that even I do not fully understand. But one thing is clear. She looked directly at Aloan. The awakening was never meant to stay secret. Far beyond Elder Grove, beyond rivers, forests, mountain ranges, and the borders of 3 separate kingdoms, another sign appeared. In the royal city of Thornhaven, sunlight poured through towering windows of polished stone. The great hall buzzed with the quiet rhythm of governance. Advisors discussed trade routes. Couriers carried reports. Noble families negotiated alliances. Yet none of it held the attention of the man seated upon the elevated throne. King Alaric Thornvale stared at the strange silver mark glowing faintly on his wrist. It had appeared at dawn. At first he believed it to be a trick of light, but the symbol remained. Ancient, elegant, unmistakably magical. He flexed his hand. The glow pulsed once beneath his skin. Across the hall, his closest advisor noticed the movement. Your Majesty? Alaric did not immediately answer. His silver eyes remained fixed upon the symbol. A feeling had settled inside him hours earlier. Not pain, not fear. A pull, like a distant call carried across impossible miles. He rose from the throne. The movement immediately silenced the hall. Conversation stopped. Every eye followed him. "Cancel the afternoon council session," he said. Several advisors exchanged confused glances. "Your Majesty?" one asked carefully. "The Eastern negotiations cannot be delayed." Alaric turned toward the massive windows overlooking the city. Far beyond the horizon lay territories untouched by the concerns of his court. Somewhere beyond those lands, beyond roads he had never traveled, something had awakened. And somehow, he knew it was connected to the symbol on his wrist. Reschedule them. His voice remained calm, but final. No one argued. The king rarely changed plans without reason. The fact that he was doing so now made the room uneasy. As the advisors slowly dispersed, a sudden gust of wind swept through the open balcony doors. Papers fluttered. Curtains billowed. Alaric stepped outside. The autumn air felt sharp against his skin. Then he heard it. A howl. Distant. Ancient. It echoed from the mountains beyond the northern frontier. Another answered from somewhere far to the west. Then another from lands beyond the southern borders. The sound sent a strange chill through him. Wolves across the kingdoms were responding to something. A signal older than any crown. The silver symbol on his wrist brightened. For a brief moment, a vision flashed through his mind. Silver leaves drifting through moonlight. A glowing tree, and a young woman standing alone beneath its branches. The image vanished as quickly as it came. Alaric stood motionless. He had never seen her before. Yet certainty settled deep within him. She was real. Somewhere beyond 3 kingdoms, she existed. And somehow, destiny had just placed her path across his own. Back in Elder Grove, as evening shadows stretched across the village, Eloan stood once again by the lodge window. The forest beyond seemed darker tonight, more watchful. Then a single silver leaf drifted past the glass from nowhere at all. It spun gently in the air before disappearing into the gathering dusk. And far beyond the horizon, King Alaric Thornvale quietly ordered his horse prepared for a journey that would carry him across 3 kingdoms in search of the girl he had never met. The next morning arrived beneath a sky of pale gray clouds. Elder Grove felt different now. The village paths that Eloan had walked her entire life seemed unfamiliar, as though the awakening of the sacred tree had quietly changed more than anyone realized. From the window of the Eastern Lodge, she watched wolves move through their daily routines while carefully avoiding the road that passed closest to her door. No one spoke to her. No one smiled. She had become the center of every conversation and the recipient of none. The loneliness settled heavily inside her chest. A soft knock broke the silence. Maeve entered carrying a folded blanket and a small stack of papers. Her face appeared more tired than usual. "You have visitors," she said quietly. Eloan immediately tensed. "Who?" "The council." Minutes later, she found herself seated across from the Alpha and several elders inside the council hall. Sunlight filtered through narrow windows, casting long beams across the polished wooden floor. The atmosphere felt formal, careful, as though every word spoken might alter the future. The Alpha rested both hands upon the table. "We received additional reports this morning." Eloan listened without speaking. "Messengers have arrived from neighboring territories." Her pulse quickened. "About the tree? About you?" Several elders exchanged uneasy glances. One unfolded a map across the table. New markings covered roads, villages, and distant territories. "Travelers are reporting unusual signs across the region," he explained. "Silver leaves appearing where none should exist. Ancient stones glowing during the night. Wolves hearing distant howls carried by no known pack." Eloan stared at the map. The awakening was spreading far beyond Elder Grove. "What does it mean?" she asked quietly. Maeve answered before anyone else could. "It means the prophecy is moving." Silence followed. The phrase lingered heavily in the room. Outside the council hall, unfamiliar wagons continued arriving in the village square. The world was beginning to pay attention. More than 500 miles away, King Alaric Thornvale guided his black stallion toward the frozen heights of Frostmere Pass. Snow covered the mountain road despite the season. Sharp winds swept across the cliffs, carrying icy crystals through the air. Travelers descending the pass stopped when they recognized the royal crest upon his cloak. One elderly merchant shook his head. "Your Majesty, the upper road is dangerous today. Most riders are turning back." Alaric looked toward the distant peaks. The silver symbol beneath his glove pulsed once. The same pull remained. Steady, unyielding. Then I will continue alone if necessary, he replied calmly. The merchant blinked in surprise. For what purpose? Alaric's gaze remained fixed on the horizon. Someone is waiting. Hours later, he crossed Frostmere's border and descended into the forests of Ashen Hollow. Golden leaves drifted across the roads beneath towering trees. As evening approached, the local lord welcomed the royal travelers into his estate. Warm fires burned throughout the great hall. Food filled the tables. Stay the night, the lord insisted. The roads ahead are long. Several royal guards quietly agreed. They had already traveled hundreds of miles. Yet Alaric shook his head. I appreciate your hospitality. Then why leave so soon? The lord asked. For a moment Alaric considered the question. How could he explain a calling he barely understood himself? Finally, he answered with complete honesty. Because every mile matters. Before dawn, he departed Ashen Hollow and continued southward. The third kingdom, Sunreach, greeted him with dark clouds and relentless rain. The roads turned slick. Visibility dropped. Even experienced riders struggled against the weather. One of the guards moved alongside him. Your Majesty, we could wait until morning. The storm will pass. Alaric looked toward the unseen horizon beyond the rain. Somewhere past mountains, forests, and rivers stood a young woman who did not yet know he was coming. A woman the world seemed determined to fear. His expression hardened with quiet resolve. Every hour I wait, he said, is another hour she stands alone. No one argued after that. They rode on. Late that evening, as the storm finally weakened, Alaric reached the highest ridge overlooking the valley beyond Sunreach. The silver symbol on his wrist suddenly flared brighter than ever before. At the same moment, hundreds of miles away, Eloan stood beside the window of the Eastern Lodge and felt a strange warmth spread through her chest. Neither understood what was happening, yet both looked toward the horizon at exactly the same moment. And for the first time since the sacred tree awakened, the distance separating them no longer felt impossible. By sunrise, Elder Grove no longer felt like a forgotten village hidden among ancient pines. It felt like the center of a storm. Eloan stood near the window of the Eastern Lodge and watched unfamiliar wagons roll through the village gates. Travelers filled the roads. Merchants, scholars, pack representatives, and curious strangers moved through the streets carrying rumors from distant lands. Every conversation seemed to lead back to the same subject. The sacred tree, the chosen girl, the prophecy. She stepped away from the window and wrapped her arms around herself. None of this felt real. 3 days ago, most wolves in Elder Grove barely noticed when she entered a room. Now people had crossed hundreds of miles simply to glimpse her. The attention felt less like admiration and more like pressure. A quiet knock sounded. Maeve entered carrying another bundle of old records. Her expression was troubled. The council has reached a decision, she said. Eloan immediately felt her stomach tighten. What kind of decision? Maeve hesitated. Not everyone believes the prophecy should be welcomed. Eloan already knew that. She had seen the fear growing behind the smiles of certain elders. Fear had a way of becoming suspicion. Suspicion had a way of becoming action. An hour later, she found herself standing inside the council hall once again. The atmosphere felt colder than before. Several elders sat along the long table. The Alpha stood near the far window overlooking the crowded village square. Nobody smiled. Nobody offered reassurance. Finally, one elder cleared his throat. The situation is becoming difficult to control. Eloan remained silent. Another elder folded his hands. More visitors arrive every hour. More questions. More demands. That is not my fault, Eloan said quietly. No, the elder replied. But you are the reason. The words stung despite their calm delivery. The Alpha turned toward her. There are wolves who believe your presence is attracting this chaos. Eloan stared at him. My presence. Some believe the prophecy is dangerous. And what do you believe? She asked. The room fell silent. The Alpha looked away first. That answer told her everything. By late afternoon, the decision was announced publicly. For the safety of the pack, Eloan would be escorted beyond Elder Grove's borders until the situation stabilized. The words sounded polite. The meaning was not. She was being sent away. Not because she had done something wrong. Because they were afraid. A crowd gathered near the square as the announcement spread. Some wolves looked uncomfortable. Others seemed relieved. A few openly approved. Aloan stood at the edge of the gathering and listened as her entire future was discussed like a problem that needed solving. She should have been angry. Instead, she felt tired. Deeply tired. Maeve found her shortly before sunset. I argued against it. The older woman said softly. I know. You do not have to face this alone. Aloan managed a faint smile. You are the only person who has said that. Together, they walked toward the sacred tree one final time before her departure. The village had grown strangely quiet. The enormous silver branches stretched overhead, glowing faintly beneath the evening sky. Aloan placed a hand against the ancient bark. Warmth immediately flowed through her palm. Familiar. Comforting. For the first time since the awakening, she felt calm. I wish I understood, she whispered. The tree offered no answer. Yet as she stood there, a single silver blossom drifted from the branches and landed gently in her hand. Maeve's eyes widened. It knows. Knows what? Aloan asked. Before Maeve could answer, a distant sound echoed across the valley. Hoofbeats. Dozens of them. Fast. Approaching. Heads turned throughout the village. Wolves emerged from homes and shops. Travelers stepped into the streets. The sound grew louder with every passing second. Aloan felt her heart begin to race. Riders appeared on the western road just as the sun dipped below the horizon. Dark cloaks. Silver banners. Royal colors. The crowd immediately fell silent. No one needed an explanation. Everyone recognized the crest carried at the front of the approaching procession. And at the head of the riders, beneath the fading gold light of sunset, rode a man whose silver eyes were fixed on only one person in the entire village. The entire village seemed to hold its breath. The riders slowed as they entered the square, their horses moving with disciplined precision through the silent crowd. Silver banners stirred gently in the evening breeze, catching the last traces of sunlight. No one spoke. No one dared. Every eye remained fixed on the man at the front of the procession. Aloan felt her pulse hammering against her ribs. She had never seen King Alaric Thornvale before, yet something inside her recognized him instantly. Not his face. Not his title. Something deeper. Something impossible to explain. He guided his horse forward until only a few yards separated them. Then he stopped. For a long moment, neither of them moved. The world around them seemed to disappear. The crowd. The whispers. The fear. All of it faded beneath the strange certainty hanging in the air between them. Alaric's silver eyes never left hers. Calm. Steady. Familiar. The realization sent a shiver through her. Around them, villagers exchanged confused glances. Some expected the king to address the elders. Others expected him to speak with the Alpha of Eldergrove. Instead, he slowly dismounted. Dust settled around his boots as he stepped forward. The Alpha of Eldergrove immediately approached. Your Majesty, he said respectfully. We were not informed of your arrival. Alaric acknowledged him with a brief nod, but continued walking. His attention never left Aloan. Every step felt deliberate, certain, as though he had already crossed this distance 1,000 times in his mind before ever arriving here. The crowd parted without being asked. Silence deepened. Aloan suddenly became aware of every heartbeat, every breath, every pair of eyes watching them. She wanted to look away. She could not. Alaric stopped directly before her. For several seconds, he simply looked at her. Not with judgment. Not with curiosity. With recognition. Relief softened his features, as though a burden carried across mountains had finally been set down. Then, before anyone could understand what was happening, the king of Thornhaven lowered himself onto one knee. A wave of astonished gasps swept through the square. Several villagers physically stepped backward. Even the elders looked stunned. Kings did not kneel. Not before strangers. Not before an outcast Omega. Yet Alaric remained there. Aloan stared at him, unable to speak. Your Majesty, she finally whispered. He looked up at her and smiled faintly. At last, he said quietly, I found you. Emotion tightened unexpectedly in Aloan's chest. No one had ever searched for her before. No one had ever crossed mountains and kingdoms because her existence mattered. Alaric slowly rose to his feet. The silver mark beneath his wrist glowed softly. They told me an ancient prophecy had awakened, he said. The crowd listened in complete silence. They told me the sacred tree had chosen someone. He paused. His gaze never left Aloan. They told me a chosen one was waiting beyond the forests. The square remained perfectly still. But the farther I traveled, the less I thought about prophecies. His voice softened. The farther I traveled, the more every road seemed to lead to the same person. Aloan felt her breath catch. You. Silence swept across the village. Even the wind seemed to pause. Alaric took another step closer. I crossed mountains. His eyes never left hers. I crossed Frostmere. Another step. I crossed Ashen Hollow. Another. I crossed Sunreach. The silver mark on his wrist brightened. Not for power. A pause. Not for a throne. Another pause. For you. The words landed with a force greater than any proclamation. Years of rejection. Years of loneliness. Years of believing she was invisible. They cracked apart beneath the simple certainty in his voice. Above them, the sacred tree responded instantly. Silver light surged through every branch. Thousands of blossoms opened at once, bathing the square in radiant moonlit color. Petals drifted gently through the air. Children stared upward in wonder. Travelers stood speechless. Maeve covered her mouth with trembling hands. Tears filled her eyes. The prophecy, she whispered. It was never about power. The symbol hidden within the trunk brightened again. This time a second symbol appeared beside it, identical to the mark glowing on Alaric's wrist. Murmurs swept through the crowd. The connection could no longer be denied. Aloan looked at the king's hand and then back at his face. You did not even know my name, she said softly. No, Alaric admitted. But every sign in the world pointed me here. His expression warmed. They called you forgotten. The crowd lowered their eyes. Yet every mile I traveled brought me closer to the one person destiny refused to forget. Around them, wolves who had doubted her now stood silent. Wolves who had feared her no longer seemed certain of themselves. The arrival of a king willing to cross 3 kingdoms for an omega they had nearly cast aside had changed everything. Then the ancient bells began ringing once more. Deep, powerful, echoing across the valley. The sacred tree blazed brighter than ever before. Silver light streamed through its roots, spreading beneath the earth in every direction. Maeve stared at the glowing symbols, and suddenly her expression shifted from wonder to alarm. She took a slow step backward. No, she whispered. The records were incomplete. Aloan turned toward her. What is it? Maeve looked from the tree to the glowing map beginning to form within its bark. Her voice barely rose above a whisper. This was never the end of the prophecy. The ancient bells continued to ring across the valley, their deep voices echoing through forests, mountains, and distant roads far beyond Elder Grove. Every wolf in the square stood motionless beneath the silver glow of the sacred tree. The air itself seemed alive with magic. Thousands of blossoms shimmered among the branches overhead, casting soft silver light across the gathered crowd. Aloan turned toward Maeve, her heart still racing. What do you mean the records were incomplete? Maeve stepped closer to the glowing trunk. Her weathered hands trembled as she studied the symbols spreading across the bark. Because this prophecy was never only about finding the chosen one, she whispered. It was about what happens after she is found. The silver lines within the tree expanded. Before everyone's eyes, the glowing symbols transformed into a vast map stretching across the trunk. Mountains appeared. Rivers. Forest roads connecting distant territories. Gasps spread through the crowd. No one had ever seen the sacred tree reveal anything like this. Then small points of silver light began appearing across the map, one after another. Yet the tree showed something different. Connection. Unity. Memory. King Alaric stepped beside Aloan. The silver mark on his wrist glowed brighter than ever before. The kingdoms forgot who they were, he said quietly. The prophecy was never about creating something new. His gaze moved toward the glowing map. It was about restoring what was lost. A pulse of silver light traveled through the roots beneath the square. The ground hummed softly. Far above, more blossoms opened among the branches. Then something unexpected happened. The Alpha of Elder Grove slowly stepped forward. His expression carried none of the certainty he once possessed. Only humility remained. The crowd watched him carefully. He stopped several feet from Aloan. For a moment he struggled to find the words. Then he lowered his head. We failed you. The square fell silent. The apology carried farther than any speech. Several elders exchanged uncomfortable glances before lowering their heads as well. One by one, wolves throughout the crowd followed. Travelers, villagers, even those who had whispered against her. Eloan stared in disbelief. All her life, she had imagined what it would feel like to finally be accepted. Yet she never expected this. Not because she demanded it. Not because she earned it through power. Because the truth had finally become impossible to ignore. The Alpha lifted his eyes. You deserved trust when we gave you doubt. His voice was steady but sincere. You deserved kindness when we gave you distance. Eloan felt years of loneliness pressing against her heart. Every ignored greeting. Every whispered remark. Every moment, she questioned her own worth. The pain remained real. Yet standing beneath the sacred tree, surrounded by silver light, she realized something important. None of those moments defined her anymore. King Alaric looked toward the crowd. His voice carried clearly through the square. She was never your burden. Silence deepened. She was your blessing. The words settled over everyone present. No one argued. No one could. Above them, the sacred tree responded immediately. Brilliant silver light surged through every branch. Blossoms drifted gently across the square like falling stars. Children laughed as petals landed in their hands. Elders looked upward in wonder. The atmosphere transformed completely. Fear finally released its grip. Eloan looked around at the faces surrounding her. Faces that once overlooked her. Faces now filled with respect, understanding, and hope. Slowly, she smiled. Not because everything had been perfect. Not because the past disappeared. Because she finally understood her own value. She had never needed the world's permission to matter. The sacred tree had simply helped everyone else see what had always been true. Alaric offered his hand. Not as a king. Not as a ruler. Simply as someone choosing to walk beside her. Eloan placed her hand in his. The moment their fingers touched, the glowing map within the tree settled into a calm and steady radiance. Complete. Peaceful. Whole. Beyond the valley, distant howls rose beneath the moon. One voice joined another. Then another. Across forests, mountains, and kingdoms, wolves lifted their heads toward the night sky. Not in warning. Not in fear. In welcome. And beneath the shining branches of the sacred tree, the rejected Omega who once stood alone found herself surrounded by friendship, respect, purpose, and a future brighter than she had ever dared imagine. While all across the kingdoms, a new chapter quietly began.